We have a little musical introduction today. It's Tweetie Bird. You can sing with feeling while feeling for the soap. I think that's what he's Tweetie Bird saying. Anyway, I was looking for Bugs Bunny sings the same song, but I couldn't find it. And this is the gratuitous. What is this? This is the gratuitous feel good musical intro episode of reading great books in the bathtub. And you notice how bad movies can be made. Bad movies can be made to seem really fun if you put a really good soundtrack in them. So I figured Tweetie Bird could really liven this thing up a lot. Today we're going to, this is the Zdravstvuyte. We're going to, Zdravstvuyte moj drug, or drugya, whatever. Don't, for God's sakes, the idiots who want to tell me my translation. Zdravstvuyte is Russian for hello. We're going to do the Russian bathtub today. And because we talked about reading Turgenev, the wonderful novel, mid to late period novel by William Trevor a few weeks ago, sent me back to Turgenev. It's the best I can do. Do not write notes to me. I could care less. So Turgenev is one of the writers I've most enjoyed over the years, and I go back to more often than not. And so it sort of set me back to reread. I've reread these books, like Chekhov and Richard Yates and Brian Moore, my favorite writers. I reread over and over the years. And the little setup I wanted to say was that Turgenev was mid to late 1800s in Russia, and the writers, most of the Russian writers, most of you know, is Dostoevsky, super serious, really complicated, incredibly good read, especially when you're 19. You should really read Dostoevsky, and we'll take this in the bathtub. And then I think when you're 19, but when you're 119, you can also read any Tolstoy's great books. But the difference between Turgenev and these other writers more vividly probably is that these were kind of big, dense, sometimes imposing books, great reads, great pleasurable reads, but big serious books with lots of ideas in them. Whereas Turgenev is a much subtler flavor. And he's a wonderful writer, and his books are shorter. He wrote a lot of stories that are kind of lost a bit. You can find a lot of them. I've been collecting these old in England. I've been picking up all these old original editions. The old Heinemann, when Constance Garnett was translating all of the Turgenev, including the short stories in the early 20th century, late 19th century, and these are pretty easy to get even on eBay. So Turgenev, I'm not going to talk too much the literary history about Turgenev because I don't remember most of it, but he's one of those writers who he does everything right. So he's a writer's writer. Writers enjoy reading him because he's a very gentle writer, and he always knows how to set up a scene, and he's very good with point of view, and he's a very emotional writer, and he never stomps around on stuff as Dostoevsky sometimes when he's shrieking. He's a very gentle writer. And you can see he's very much a William Trevor sort of writer. Which sort of gets me back to the point I was thinking, it's Hemingway, who's actually a good reader. He actually read a lot. I always remember, when I think of Turgenev, I remember how Hemingway would also recommend certain books. He'd recommend a certain Tolstoy, he'd recommend a certain Balzac. But when it came to Turgenev, he said, read it all. Read all of Turgenev, and you should just keep rereading him. And I think that's fairly true. I think Hemingway was sort of a good taste in reading. So this past couple of weeks, I read On the Eve, and I don't remember which ones. I've read them all, but I can't remember which ones I've read most recently. On the Eve is the kind of little set pieces set in these kind of provincial middle-class families with lots of serfs running around. These are very pretty much slave-holding families in Russia, so they pretty much own the souls of all these people working on their estates. And these kind of closed, very repressive families. And the young girl in this, I think her name is Elena, is sort of the lovely girl that all the guys in town love. There's always this one pretty girl that everyone loves. And she meets a guy named Insarov, and it's a good book. It's not my favorite. I actually have to, about 2/3 of the way through, I remember that it wasn't my favorite of the Turgenevs, and I couldn't remember why. but it just never kind of takes off. And there's a central kind of uh, charismatic character named Insarov, who's a Bulgarian revolutionary, as I recall, and this is before, on the eve of the Crimean War, and when everyone's trying to find ways to free these serfs, and Turgenev was a fairly liberal, fairly strongly liberal personality who came from a very well-off family, very wealthy mother, really peculiar, sounds like a horrible woman, really appalling, difficult woman. And he writes this sort of novel which about, they talk a little bit about what are we going to do and how are we going to rectify this miserable life. But he doesn't, they're not political books usually. And this one's a little bit more political than usual, and it never quite takes off. And I didn't realize until I got to the end of it, because of some, actually when I got to the biography, that he actually models this novel based on a real character and a real diary or real story idea from somebody. I forget how it works. Anyway, it doesn't quite work as well, but everything he writes is good, and there's some beautiful stuff in it. So when I finished that, I went back to one of my favorites, which is called First Love, one of the most famous Turgenevs. I'm having a Manhattan. I broke out the Manhattans again, and First Love is really a beautiful book, and you read it basically in an hour or two. It's a very short novel. It's about a young man, sort of like Turgenev himself, who lives in a fairly well-off estate, and a princess moves in next door, a shabby aristocrat, a princess who's really broke, and her daughter, named Zenaida, I don't know if I'm pronouncing that right. Zenaida is this 20-year-old girl that all the guys in town, again, they all flock to the house to play games with her and to flirt with her. And the 16-year-old boy who tells the story is just basically about his love for this girl and his recognition that something strange is happening in the neighborhood, and something strange is happening in his family, and his father is, this is not a spoiler, but the father is clearly running around with this 20-year-old girl. It's a beautiful book, and I thought I would just read a little passage to give you a little sense of the prose. It's very perfect. It's exact, and it's gentle, and it's clear. And when he does emotions, he tends to do the emotions by just seeing things for you. This is the day after he's upset with this girl. He realizes she doesn't love him, and he's 16 years old. He's heartbroken, and he wants to go off and feel sorry for himself. And the narrator says, "The next day, I got up early, cut myself a stick, and set off beyond the town gates. I thought I would walk off my sorrow. It was a lovely day, bright and not too hot. A fresh, sportive breeze roved over the earth with temperate rustle and frolic, setting all things aflutter and harassing nothing. I wandered a long while over hills and through woods. I had not felt happy. I had left home with the intention of giving myself up to melancholy, but youth, the exquisite weather, the fresh air, the pleasure of rapid motion, the sweetness of repose lying in the thick grass in a solitary nook, gained the upper hand. The memory of those never-to-be-forgotten words, those kisses, forced itself once more upon my soul. It was sweet to me to think that Zenaida could not, anyway, fail to do justice to my courage, my heroism. Others may seem better to her than I mused. Let them. But others only say what they would do. Well, I have done it. And what more would I not do for her?" So that little kind of emotional shift, he's really good at these little emotional changes in the temperature of going off wanting to feel sorry, and then just the beautiful day. And he writes really well about nature. And they're really absorbing stories. I really recommend Turgenev. He's perfect for the bathtub. We'll read some of the better novels as I get around to them again. And even some of these short novels. I picked up, because I know I've read it before. I've read a couple biographies of Turgenev, and there's not a lot available in English. I picked this one up, Avram Yarmolinsky. I think it's from the 20s and revised in the 50s. And it's good. It's a good biography. You get a good sense of the man. He's very likable. He's like Chekhov. I mean, I don't know what I think about Tolstoy or Dostoevsky when I read about them as people, but Chekhov was a lovely writer, a lovely man, and Turgenev is something about him you really do like. He's a bit of a lost soul in a way. And there's, one of my favorite things in this is the opening. He talks about the mother. It was a very unattractive. Turgenev's mother was extremely ugly, I guess, and had tons of money, and was obsessive about her son, really overbearing. And he never really got away from her. He got away from her and left Russia many times over his lifetime while she was alive, and it was very hard to get away from her while she was alive. And there's a wonderful line at the very beginning of this in which he says that he's talking about the mother, and he says, "It was her tragedy to be passionate without being lovable," which is a great line. So she was a really passionate soul, but she was really unlikable, and she was really cruel to the serfs, and she was really just a difficult woman. And Turgenev has a great affection for all of his characters, even the awful ones. So you do really well. You'll enjoy him. I really recommend go out and just get First Love, and we'll do some more Turgenev in the next few weeks. Okay, happy bathing. And should I try to do this again on the way out? Hold on a second. If you do a soundtrack, you have to do it at the beginning at the end. There you go. Okay, happy bathing. This is from the Master Bather. You know what that means. And all you have some master bathing all on your own. Okay.